The bitter Montana wind cut across the prairie like a blade. As rancher Jonas Hartwell finished his evening chores and prepared to head inside for supper, the November cold was harsh even by frontier standards, and Jonas could feel the promise of snow in the air. At 52, he'd weathered enough Montana winters to know that anyone caught outside on a night like this would be in mortal danger. That's when he heard them, small voices carried on the wind, young and frightened, coming from the direction of the main road that led away from the town of Millbrook. Jonas paused, listening carefully. The voices were definitely children, and they were moving away from town rather than toward it, which struck him as strange. Most travelers would be seeking shelter in town on a night like this, not venturing into the open prairie. Grabbing his lantern and heavy coat, Jonas headed toward the road to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold with anger and disbelief. 4 boys, ranging in age from perhaps 8 to 14, were walking slowly along the frozen road, their thin clothing offering little protection against the brutal cold. They carried small bundles of belongings and moved with the exhausted stumble of people who'd been walking for hours. "Boys," Jonas called out, hurrying toward them. "What are you doing out here?" The oldest boy, a thin 14-year-old with prematurely serious eyes, looked up at Jonas with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Sir, we're looking for somewhere to spend the night," the boy said, his voice shaking from cold and exhaustion. "We don't have any money, but we could work for food and shelter." Jonas looked at the 4 young faces, noting their obvious hunger, their inadequate clothing, and the way they huddled together for warmth. "Where did you come from? Why aren't you in town?" The oldest boy's face darkened with hurt and anger. "They threw us out at night," he said simply. "Said the orphanage was closing and we had to find somewhere else to go." Jonas felt rage building in his chest. "Someone threw you out of an orphanage in this weather?" "Yes, sir," said the second oldest, a boy of maybe 12 with sandy hair and a thin face. "Mr. Garrett said the town couldn't afford to keep supporting us anymore, and we had to leave immediately." "Immediately? Tonight?" "He said if we waited until morning, we'd just be more trouble to get rid of," added the third boy, who appeared to be about 10. "So he gave us our things and told us to start walking." Jonas looked at the 4th child, the youngest, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old and was clearly struggling to keep up with his older companions. "What's your name, son?" Jonas asked gently, kneeling down to the little boy's level. "Bobby," the child whispered through chattering teeth. "I'm really cold, mister." Jonas made a decision that required no thought whatsoever. "All of you come with me right now," he said firmly. "We're getting you somewhere warm before you freeze to death." "Sir," the oldest boy protested, "we don't want charity. We can work. You can work tomorrow." Jonas interrupted. "Tonight, you're coming inside where it's warm, and you're getting hot food and dry clothes. We'll sort out everything else after you're safe." Subscribe to our channel for more incredible frontier stories. You won't believe how this act of compassion transforms all their lives. As Jonas led the 4 boys toward his ranch house, he learned their names and their story. The oldest was Michael Patterson, who'd been at the Millbrook orphanage for 3 years since his parents died in a mining accident. Next was Peter Walsh, whose family had succumbed to fever 2 years earlier. The third boy was Timothy Cole, orphaned when his parents were killed by outlaws. And little Bobby Henderson had lost his family in a house fire just 6 months ago. "How long were you at the orphanage?" Jonas asked as they approached his warm, well-lit house. "Different amounts of time," Michael replied. "But we all thought we'd be able to stay until we were old enough to make our own way in the world." "What changed?" Peter's young voice carried bitter understanding beyond his 12 years. "The town council decided orphans were too expensive to support. Mr. Garrett said they needed the building for something more important." Jonas felt his anger deepen at this casual cruelty toward defenseless children. "Did anyone try to find homes for you, families who might take you in?" "Mr. Garrett said there was no point," Timothy added. "Said nobody wanted to take on the burden of children who weren't their own." Inside his warm ranch house, Jonas immediately set about caring for his unexpected guests. He built up the fire, prepared hot food, and found extra clothes that would fit the boys better than their thin orphanage garments. As the boys sat around his table eating the first proper meal they'd had in days, Jonas studied their faces and saw something that impressed him, despite their obvious hardship and fear. These children maintained their dignity and good manners. They'd been abandoned by the very system meant to protect them, but they hadn't given up their fundamental decency. "Mr. Hartwell," Michael said as they finished eating, "we're grateful for your kindness tonight, but we don't want to impose. If you could just let us stay until morning, we'll be on our way." "Where exactly are you planning to go?" Jonas asked. The question hung in the air because, of course, the boys had nowhere to go. They'd been thrown out with no plan, no destination, and no resources beyond what they could carry. "We thought maybe we could find work in one of the other towns," Peter said without much conviction. Jonas realized these brave children were essentially planning to wander the frontier, hoping for charity or work, with winter coming and no adults to protect them. "Boys," Jonas said carefully, "what if there was another option? What if you didn't have to keep wandering?" For pairs of eyes looked at him with cautious hope. "What do you mean, sir?" Michael asked. "I mean, this is a big ranch, and I could use help with the cattle, horses, and general maintenance. I mean, you could stay here, work for your keep, and have a real home instead of just surviving day to day." The silence that followed was profound. These children had been told they were unwanted burdens, and now a stranger was offering them exactly what they'd lost, a home. "You'd really let us stay?" Little Bobby asked in wonder. "I'd be honored to have you stay," Jonas replied honestly. "This place has been too quiet for too long." As Jonas prepared beds for the 4 boys in his spare rooms, he reflected on how dramatically his life had just changed. That morning, he'd been a solitary rancher going through familiar routines. Tonight, he was the guardian of 4 children who needed not just shelter, but hope that their lives could be better than mere survival. The boys who'd been thrown out at night had found more than just temporary refuge. They'd found someone who saw their worth and was willing to invest in their future. 3 months had passed since Jonas Hartwell had rescued the 4 orphan boys from the frozen Montana road, and the transformation at the Double H Ranch had been remarkable. What had once been a quiet, orderly operation run by a single man had become a bustling center of activity where laughter mixed with the sounds of honest work. Michael, Peter, Timothy, and Bobby had not only adapted to ranch life, but had thrived in ways that amazed Jonas daily. Each boy had found his particular strengths and had contributed to making the ranch more successful than it had ever been when Jonas worked alone. Michael, the oldest at 14, had revealed natural leadership abilities and a head for organization that helped coordinate the ranch's various operations. Peter's gentle way with animals made him invaluable with the horses and cattle. Timothy had shown remarkable mechanical aptitude, able to repair equipment and solve problems that had puzzled Jonas for years, and Bobby, despite his youth, had boundless energy and an enthusiasm that lifted everyone's spirits. "Mr. Jonas," Bobby said one morning as they prepared for the day's work, "are we really going to stay here forever?" Jonas looked down at the 8-year-old who'd grown stronger and more confident over the winter months. "Would you like to stay forever, Bobby?" "Oh yes, sir," Bobby replied immediately. "This is the best home I've ever had." But Jonas could see that not all the boys shared Bobby's unqualified enthusiasm. Michael, in particular, sometimes had a distant look that suggested he was struggling with deeper questions about their situation. "Michael," Jonas said as they worked together repairing fence later that morning, "you've been quiet lately. Something troubling you?" The 14-year-old was silent for a long moment before answering. "Mr. Jonas, why did you really take us in? I mean, you could have just given us a meal and sent us on our way." Jonas set down his hammer and gave Michael his full attention. "What do you think the reason was?" "I don't know," Michael admitted. "That's what worries me. People don't usually do things without expecting something in return." Jonas realized that Michael's experience with adults had taught him to be suspicious of kindness, to look for hidden motives even in generous actions. "Michael," Jonas said seriously, "what would you say if I told you I took you boys in because this ranch was too lonely, and having you here has made my life better in ways I never expected?" "I'd say that's a good reason," Michael replied cautiously. But I'd wonder what happens when you don't need us anymore, or when we become too much trouble. Jonas understood that Michael was really asking about security, about whether they'd built something permanent or if they were just temporary guests who might be sent away. When circumstances changed, their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Jonas looked up to see 3 riders coming toward them, and something about their purposeful approach made him instinctively step closer to Michael. The lead rider was a well-dressed man in his 40s, flanked by 2 other men who had the look of officials. As they drew closer, Jonas recognized the leader, Garrett, the man who'd thrown the boys out of the orphanage, Hartwell. Garrett called out as he reined in his horse, "I need to speak with you about those orphan boys you've been harboring." Jonas felt his protective instincts surge at Garrett's choice of words. "I'm not harboring anyone. I'm providing a home for children who needed one. Those children are wards of the state." Garrett replied pompously, "I'm here to collect them for proper placement." Proper placement? Jonas's voice took on a dangerous edge. "You mean like the proper placement you gave them when you threw them out into a blizzard?" Michael had moved closer to Jonas's side, his young face pale with fear at seeing the man who'd abandoned them. The orphanage situation was temporary, Garrett said defensively. "We've now made arrangements with a work farm in Colorado that's willing to take all for boys. Subscribe to our channel now." The confrontation that's about to unfold will test everything this family has built together. Jonas realized that work farm was likely a euphemism for what amounted to child labor, where the boys would work without pay under harsh conditions. "And if I refuse to let you take them, then you'll be charged with kidnapping," Garrett replied smoothly. "These boys are legally under state supervision, not yours." Jonas looked at Michael, seeing the terror in the boy's eyes at the prospect of being separated from the only stability he'd known in years. "Mr. Garrett," Michael said, his young voice steady despite his obvious fear, "we don't want to go to Colorado. We want to stay here with Mr. Jonas." "What you want isn't relevant," Garrett snapped. "Your children, and children don't get to make decisions about their own welfare." That's when Peter, Timothy, and Bobby appeared. Having heard the raised voices, all 4 boys moved to stand near Jonas, presenting a united front against the man who'd once abandoned them. "Mr. Garrett," Peter said with remarkable courage for a 12-year-old, "you told us nobody wanted us, but Mr. Jonas does want us. Why can't we stay where we're wanted?" Garrett's face reddened at being challenged by children. "Because I have legal authority over you, and I've decided what's best." Jonas realized he was facing a crisis that could destroy the family they'd built together. But he also understood that sometimes protecting the people you love required taking risks. "Mr. Garrett," Jonas said quietly, "these boys have been living with me for 3 months. They're healthy, happy, and contributing members of this household. What possible justification could you have for breaking up a situation that's working perfectly?" "The justification is that they belong in a proper institutional setting with other orphans," Garrett replied. "You mean they belong somewhere that costs the state less money and asks fewer questions about how they're treated?" Jonas countered. The standoff continued for several more minutes, with Garrett insisting on his legal authority and Jonas refusing to surrender children who'd become his sons in everything but legal documentation. Finally, Garrett made his ultimatum. "You have 24 hours to prepare the boys for transport, Hartwell. After that, I'll be back with federal marshals if necessary." As Garrett and his companions rode away, Jonas found himself surrounded by 4 frightened boys who looked to him for answers. He wasn't sure he had. "Are they really going to take us away?" Bobby asked in a small voice. Jonas knelt down and put his arms around all 4 boys. "Not if I can help it," he said firmly. "We're a family now, and families protect each other." But even as he made that promise, Jonas was already planning what might be necessary to keep it. If the law wouldn't protect these children, then he'd have to find another way to ensure their safety and keep their family together. The 24 hours that followed Harold Garrett's ultimatum were the longest of Jonas Hartwell's life. He'd spent the time not just planning how to protect the boys, but also helping them understand what they might be facing and what choices they'd need to make. "Boys," Jonas said as they gathered around the kitchen table that evening, I want you to understand something important. What happens tomorrow isn't just about legal papers or official authority. It's about what kind of family we choose to be. Michael, who'd been quiet and thoughtful all day, looked up at Jonas with eyes that seemed far older than his 14 years. Mr. Jonas, Michael said seriously, we know you'd do anything to keep us safe, but we don't want you to get in trouble because of us. And we don't want you to think you have to fight our battles for us. Peter added, we can speak for ourselves. Jonas felt his chest swell with pride at the maturity and courage these boys had developed. They weren't just thinking about their own welfare. They were concerned about protecting him as well. What are you saying? Jonas asked. Timothy, who'd been unusually quiet, spoke up with determination. We're saying that if Mr. Garrett comes back, we want to tell him ourselves that we choose to stay here, that this is our home and you're our family, and if he won't listen to us, Bobby added with 8-year-old logic, then we'll just have to show him how much we belong here. The next morning brought Harold Garrett as promised, but this time he came with more authority. Federal Marshal Tom Bradley accompanied him, along with official papers that gave them legal power to remove the boys. Hartwell, Garrett said, as he dismounted in Jonas's yard, I trust you've prepared the boys for transport. I've prepared them to make their own choice about where they belong. Jonas replied evenly. Marshal Bradley, a fair-minded man with years of frontier law enforcement experience, studied the situation carefully before speaking. Mr. Hartwell, Bradley said, Mr. Garrett has legal custody of these children. Unless you can demonstrate that they're in some kind of danger, I'm obligated to enforce the court order. Then let's ask them what they want, Jonas suggested. What followed was one of the most remarkable displays of courage and eloquence that the frontier had ever witnessed. One by one, the 4 boys stepped forward to address the marshal and explain why they belonged with Jonas. Michael spoke first, with the dignity and composure of someone far beyond his years. Marshal Bradley, 3 months ago, Mr. Garrett threw us out into a blizzard with nowhere to go. We would have died if Mr. Jonas hadn't found us and taken us in. Mr. Hartwell has given us more than just food and shelter, Peter continued. He's given us a real home where we're wanted and valued. Timothy stepped forward with a confidence that amazed everyone present. Sir, I know you have to follow the law, but the law should protect children, not hurt them. Sending us away from the first real family we've ever had would hurt us. But it was Bobby who delivered the most powerful argument of all. Mr. Marshall, the 8-year-old said clearly, Mr. Jonas didn't take us in because he had to. He took us in because he wanted to. Isn't that what families are supposed to be about? Subscribe to our channel for more incredible frontier stories. You won't believe how this brave stand for family transforms everyone involved. Marshal Bradley looked at the 4 boys, seeing not just their words, but their obvious health, happiness, and deep attachment to Jonas. Then he looked at Jonas himself, seeing a man who'd clearly dedicated himself to these children's welfare. Mr. Garrett, Bradley said slowly, these boys seem well cared for and genuinely happy. What's the state's compelling interest in removing them from a good home? Garrett looked uncomfortable under the marshal's scrutiny. The compelling interest is following proper procedures for orphan placement and this work farm in Colorado. What exactly would these boys be doing there? Agricultural work, learning useful skills, unpaid agricultural work. Bradley pressed. Garrett's hesitation was answer enough. Marshal Bradley made a decision that would change all their lives. Mr. Hartwell, Bradley said formally, are you willing to apply for legal guardianship of these 4 boys? Absolutely, Jonas replied without hesitation. Then I'm suspending this removal order pending a proper guardianship hearing. These boys will remain in your custody until the territorial court can review the situation. Garrett's face reddened. With anger, you can't just ignore a valid court order. I'm not ignoring it. Bradley replied calmly. I'm exercising my discretion to ensure that children are placed in situations that serve their best interests, not just bureaucratic convenience. 6 months later, Jonas Hartwell stood in the territorial courthouse as a judge made his guardianship of Michael, Peter, Timothy, and Bobby official and permanent. The boys had testified eloquently about their desire to remain with the man who'd given them not just shelter, but love and hope for the future. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, when they returned to the ranch that had become their true home. "Pa," Bobby said, using the title that had developed naturally over the months, "will you tell us again about the night you found us?" Jonas smiled at the four young men who'd transformed his solitary life into something rich and meaningful. "You boys weren't lost," Jonas said. "You were just walking toward the place where you belonged. I was just lucky enough to be there when you arrived." Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of family, courage, and finding where you belong from the American frontier. Hit that subscribe button now, because these tales prove that the strongest families are built on choice, not just chance. Michael, now 15 and growing into a natural leader, put his arm around his youngest brother's shoulders. "They threw us out at night," Michael said, echoing the words that had started their journey. "But the rancher gave us shelter and hope, and showed us that home isn't just a place. It's the people who choose to love you." As the Montana stars appeared in the darkening sky above their ranch, Jonas and his four sons understood that they'd discovered something more precious than gold, proof that families could be created through love and commitment, and that sometimes the people who needed each other most were brought together by the darkest moments of their lives. The boys who'd been cast into darkness had found their way to the light, not through luck, but through the courage to accept love when it was offered and the wisdom to choose family over fear. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these incredible tales of frontier family and chosen bow. NDS to life. Subscribe now and join us for more amazing stories that prove love and commitment can overcome any obstacle.